Welcome in. It's Sunday. It's a weekend edition. We have a bunch of action here on the Diamond. It's the MLB Live Before Lock. And yes, with 11 games on the slate, not much time for Terry McBride and myself, Jordan in the house producing, as you know, to venture away. But look, that's just the nature of what we do. So I can't make any promises outside of Terry's going to make you some money today. That's the biggest, most confident thing that I could say, Mr. McBride.
Somebody
and also,
out there
I don't want to get punched in the face by you ever. I learned that ahead of time.
See, that's the fun part of that story is I'm not a particularly big or strong person. So sometimes the punches come and, I tend not to get punched back for either my big mouth or for my just, hot temper. Over the course of my life, I haven't been punched that many times, surprisingly. A lot of people would be very surprised and shocked to hear that. But should be a good one. And definitely guarantee somebody out there is going to win something based on some random piece of information we give, because we're going to cover the entire slate top to bottom.
You're right, my friend. And that's exactly what we do. And again, it's super chats. It's just people coming in. It's screenshots. It's the Hall of Fame, everything. Tweets from you. I saw Greg smash the shit out of a couple of slates last night, right? So somebody in the Stokastic family is going to do something big today. We just don't know who specifically it is. Like, we could set odds, but we just don't know who specifically it's going to be.
That's right. Anybody in the sound of our voices right now, it could be you. Anybody checking out the tools, the content at the site, it could be you. So yeah, we see it every day though. I mean, not only is the staff, the team killing it, just the members, so many different people, so many different names and logos up at the top of all the tournaments. It's great to see. It's a lot of fun.
Sounds like the old sweepstakes. You may have already won, except in this case, you don't even know that you're entering today.
Right. Yeah. This time it may actually happen.
Exactly,
we might not have Ed McMahon show up at your house. I'm pretty sure he's not alive anymore. So you might not want that. If Ed McMahon showed up at your house now, but he still had the big check, do you let him in? Like zombie Ed McMahon?
Absolutely.
I think you have to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you just deal with the zombie aspect. Like, you
get the zombie.
Maybe you
about
get the
that.
check, you kill him with the big check.
That's true. Although those things are tough to wield, man. Tough to wield. Let's look at this here. 11 games on the slate. It's Sunday. We get early action. So that could impact what you're doing as far as just general strategy. Is there anything, and again, we're going to go through this. We're going to look at stacks. We're going to look at where we have our projections on Stokastic, Alex, the latest for top pitchers as well. But is there anything that jumps out from maybe a shift of strategy to just one game or one area that might be worthy of mentioning as a global look of the slate?
So I think we've got what should be anyway, a clear cut on this side of lock pitching slate with three aces in excellent matchups. Take your pick between Scherzer, Verlander, and Dylan Cease. I've got them all projected very similarly. They're all at the top of the Stokastic board. And then it drops off pretty quickly. There are serviceable, playable pitchers, but there's a lot of guys who, like, if I'm getting my 25 or whatever at Enron Marquez against the Mets or Nick Lodolo against the Nationals in FanDuel scoring, and then I'm seeing Verlander, Scherzer, and Cease all in that like 50-point FanDuel range, I'm just going to regret those shares, I think, in a lot of ways. So it's kind of a clear-cut pitching slate, much more interesting hitting slate. And then just poking around on the DK stuff, DK made their pricing very low on a lot of bats. So they made it pretty easy to access the top end of pitching from what I can see. So like you can grab four guys from the Pirates, or a five-man Pirate stack for around 10,000 total salary. Not the greatest teams to go to. A five-man Tiger stack for exactly 10,000 in salary. So there's just a lot of ways to get there. And then there's a lot of $2,000 to $2,500 DK bats strung through a lot of these lineups. So it seems easy to build over on DK today.
How many, and I don't know if they're fully crunched for you or not, but how much do you anticipate putting lineups together on DK where two of these three, even if it's rotation, right? You mentioned Scherzer, Verlander, and Cease. How often do you think you're filling top two slots with two of those three guys? Because they're all three of them are going to be the spend ups.
Yeah, I think it's totally justifiable to go to them very, very frequently and pair them together as much as you possibly can. Now, we're talking about an 11,400 and 11,000 and a $10,600 pitcher.
Yep.
So you're really winnowing your options of what you can do with value. But like I said, there are a lot of different value bats and value combinations that you can get to. It's just a lot of people will be using those teams in combination with those pitchers when they double it up. So just be wary of what you're doing. Maybe make some key pivots around the bats. But yeah, if you're putting those guys together and figuring out how to pay for it, I don't see that as a mistake at all. You're dealing with, let's see, that's 35.3% probability of being a top two for Scherzer, 24.2 for Verlander, and 20.2 for Cease. Next highest guy on the board is 15.4 for Nick Lodolo, who is also kind of expensive and still, it's a great matchup for him as well. But those other guys are so much higher and proven than Lodolo is. It's pretty stark on this board today.
Well, it's a good way to kind of transition right to our first game, because Lodolo taking on the Nats, and from an individual standpoint, you also have Corbin on the other side. So there's going to be at 9,500, especially for a P2. And this is where it's like, okay, and I understand that Dylan Cease disappointed some people last time, right? But you're still getting the combination of Scherzer, Cease, and Verlander to pick from up there. Eric Lauer, and just looking at that was FanDuel. Sorry, updating it here. Yeah, but 9,300 for Lodolo. We'll talk about Lauer coming down there. It just, I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something more obvious, Terry. But if I'm getting to Lodolo, I feel like I can spend 1,300 more and get to a guy like Dylan Cease if I build stacks correctly. So I don't know how much that matchup jumps out at you, especially because he's losing leverage to the field.
Yeah, and look, we're talking about a good young pitcher. He's got a 28.2% strikeout rate over 60 innings this season, but he's also got a 10.3% walk rate, a 1.52 whip. It hasn't really cost him 4.35 ERA, but a 3.83 xFIP. He induces a lot of swinging strikes. He doesn't give up a ton of home runs or premium contact, but there's enough right-handed upside in that Nationals lineup that a guy who puts too many guys on base, you could see them get to him for just enough runs where it's like, it's making that dent where he drops from like a 30 and change point start or a 40-point start into those high 20s. And again, talking FanDuel scoring there, but same thing on DK, obviously. So I think there's enough where I just don't completely trust him at that price with a little bit of popularity, a little bit of negative leverage in comparison to just getting to those top three options. Or I think I honestly prefer paying a little bit less for even a Noah Syndergaard, not a great strikeout option, but certainly he can pitch very cleanly through that Pittsburgh lineup. You mentioned Eric Lauer at the same price going up against the Cubbies. A lot of decent pitchers in very good matchups today. So I don't love the Lodolo spot with ownership, but I get it. You're talking about a bad Nationals team in general. So you can grab shares, you can chase that strikeout upside. It's just that I don't fully trust him. I'll have probably half the field on FanDuel. Field's at like 10. If I'm at like 5, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, the other side of it would be if you're looking for any low-cost option, you could take a hint right at Patrick Corbin, 6,200 on DK. It's not a brutal matchup by any means. Strikeouts galore right in that Reds lineup, but I mean, it's Patrick Corbin. I know he had a great outing or good outing last time, but you're also losing leverage to the field. So it's kind of that similar spot, except it's just the poor man's version, I think, of what you laid out.
Yeah, what you're getting with the Corbin one, it is negatively leveraged. He's drawing 12% ownership. That's not really comfortable, but you're getting him at such a bigger discount, and you're chasing that, one. He's had, I think, 2 games or 3 games over 30 FanDuel points this season, including one that spiked into like the 60s. One of those was a start against this Reds team. I don't chase, most recent start against team results. I have no idea who was in the Reds lineup that day. It was probably pretty different, but Corbin, he's bad, but he's better than his 6.81 ERA. He's a 4.22 xFIP, but he's got a 1.81 whip. There's a ton of batting average on balls in play in there. He doesn't have much good stuff, so there's a lot of just easily hit balls. It's not a great play, but at 6,200, you're buying yourself a couple of bats while still going to a Cease, Scherzer, Verlander, SP1 there. So I get it. I don't know how much I trust it or believe in it. Could easily go pop. So just know what you're doing when you're putting Corbin into your lineups. I don't love it with all that ownership on DK at 11%, but I do think he's a playable value guy there.
So the difference here on there's a gap, right, when we look at the stacks, and Cincinnati actually might be a pretty interesting pathway here, especially if you're looking at a team that's projected almost double, if not more. Let me just check it right around there as far as the top stack. Yeah, right around there for Cincinnati over Washington. But to your point about Patrick Corbin catching some ownership here, this is a good matchup against him. And on top of that, 11 to 12%, looking at possible numbers as far as where his projected ownership is, it's not a chunk of the field, but it's enough to say, well, that actually combined with going up against Corbin might make the red stack, pardon me, a little bit more valuable.
Yeah, the fact that you can get to a team with their rolling out 8 guys who will be hitting right-handed to start the game here, plus TJ Friedl in the 9 spot, who's a decent stick at least. So I think it's perfectly reasonable at the very least for every Corbin share that you grab in that small packet of Corbin shares you're grabbing, grab yourself a red stack in another lineup to chase it. It's also a premium source of value on the DK slate. There are 5 hitters in that lineup priced at the dead minimum, plus Friedl's at 21. And it's not like paying 46 for India's outrageous, 38 for Former, 31 for Solano. Nobody owns all over 10%. Most of these guys in the low single digits. And again, positively leveraged from, they're like the last team in the top third of the DK stacks board there by probability. So it seems like a very good spot. It's the top ranked value spot by a lot on the top stacks tool. Top ranked stack score actually overall as well, 7.6 stack score. So the Reds are drawing the best stack score in comparison to teams that are expected to go off for much more offense just based on how much value is there. So I do think it's worth attacking, and Corbin's been an attackable pitcher all season long. So it sounds like I'm both sides in that, and I kind of am because he's priced appropriately for how bad he's been. So I think it's worth chasing both sides of it.
All right, let's move on here in tournaments, right? Yeah. Let's move on. Game 2, Boston Rays in town, short favorite for Tampa. That total a little bit more. We have a couple of larger ones, but nothing double digits, not in Coors Field by any means. So we take what we can get. The pitching matchup, though, just looking at if there's any way to really gain some leverage in that regard, you're getting Pivetta, and that's at the cost at 7,900. Kluber, though, at 8,000, I don't know if he hits that line where it starts to be like, wait, I can just spend a couple of hundred more for a guy that's going to get me a better performance versus how much you actually trust getting to Kluber. Because if you do the latter, you can gain a ton of leverage here with him.
Yeah, I don't mind taking a few tournament shots with Kluber. He doesn't project that well for me.
Yeah.
But he's had those throwback games from time to time. Overall for the season, 128 and 2/3 innings, 21.3% strikeout rate, a 3.86 xFIP, a 3.4% walk rate. He certainly never gets himself in trouble, really. So he could pitch through this lineup a couple times over clean. He's a guy they would trust to go through a third time if he's going well. If he finds a few strikeouts, there could be upside at that price. He's 0.5% owned on both sites, so it's not like you have to overextend to get to him. So for a few tournament shares, yeah, but he doesn't project out great for me. Pivetta projects a little bit better based on the matchup against the Rays here, but he's drawing more ownership, particularly on DK, 7,900, 13.2% popularity. I get that. It's probably appropriate around there. I don't know that I would push the field's ownership there. I'd probably be more in the 5 to 8% range, just take a few shots, but I don't think I want to get all the way out to where the field is, but it is a $7,900. If you're looking for that like mid-range SP2, I think it makes sense to grab a few shares of them.
So, and that's really it, right? As far as Pivetta, 7,900, I mean, it's the same price essentially. So you're losing. Yeah,
he's a better strikeout guy. He's got the better strikeout matchup between these two guys, but overall they project out somewhat similarly in that like middle 20s for me in the FanDuel slate, with Pivetta being the higher of the two.
You could get a little bit here with Tampa. We do have them in that kind of middle tier, or maybe top of the middle tier, depending on wherever you want to draw that line. So we're still early, but even Boston's stack isn't really projected out as much, to your point, against Kluber as far as the up and down that you can get. So I don't know if there is on an 11-game slate enough to really push either of these stacks. I mean, I guess you can make the better argument for Tampa, even though they're going up against the better K pitcher.
Yeah, I think so. I think between the two pitchers, the guy who's going to be more likely to get himself in trouble, the guy who's going to be more likely to give up the long ball or at least a lot of hard hits, is definitely Pivetta on the Boston side. So that would lead me more to the Tampa bats. I have enough healthy respect for the Red Sox that I would never say anybody's making a mistake rostering them at, below, 5% for the most part on DK. They haven't been great throughout the year, but there's enough very, very good bats with Xander Bogaerts, Rafi Devers, Tommy Pham is very good. Alex Verdugo is pretty good. JD Martinez can still give you a decent game. So I wouldn't say no to the Red Sox against Kluber, but I do expect him to pitch fairly well and keep them down, even if he doesn't have that big DFS upside start. On the Rays side, you get a pitcher in Pivetta who does have an 8.5% walk rate, a 1.29 whip, and he's allowed a 44.6% hard hit rate. So even when he's getting outs, the ball's being hit pretty hard, pretty regularly. And there's a decent amount of hard hit in this Tampa Bay lineup. You can chase guys like Harold Ramirez, certainly Randy Arozarena. Isaac Paredes had a very hot start to his season. He's cooled recently, but he's still sitting at 16 home runs and a 238 ISO overall. So he's a bat I would chase there. Yandy Diaz, Manny Margot, David Peralta, all decent fillers from the top of the lineup here. Yandy Diaz, I might have undersold a little bit just based on his very low strikeout rate, high walk rate. He's always going to be a guy who puts a ball in play. So if somebody's going to screw up Pivetta's day, he might be a good starting point for that. And all these guys are cheap and low owned.
So, all right, move to Philadelphia because you talked about Syndergaard and the K's are not there. I got fooled in his last start. It was against the Reds, thinking, all right, maybe it would help boost him, but I'm not going to go back to that. Although, I mean, Kyle Gibson looked like Sandy Koufax out there, so you never know. But you don't have the K rate, and I think that's the difference. However, is kind of working in Syndergaard's favor, and it's two things in this matchup. And I'll let you explain how or if it really translates into our world here, Terry. But the one thing I know is that Syndergaard has a favorable matchup by a mile against the Pirates and should be able to get me 6 innings, should be able to get me 6 on the mound, a quality start. The second part is that the Phillies bullpen, especially down Dominguez, is not a unit you want to go to consistently. So that might stretch Syndergaard out and we saw that with Bailey Falter the other night, stretched out. So I think you might get another inning, even if things get a little hairy, where normally he would get pulled in the 6th or start of the 7th, where he may get a little more leeway, A, because the Pirates, and B, because of the bullpen.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty apt call. The bullpen's been a weak point for them all season long. He's a guy that I don't want to say that you want to treat him with kid gloves necessarily, because he's pitched 7 innings his last 2 times out against Cincinnati and only needed 89, 77 pitches. He's pitched into the mid 90s several times since mid-July. So yeah, I like the upside for Syndergaard to put up a nice clean start here. And I think that's what we're chasing. It's a Pirates lineup that we've been attacking for upside all season long in terms of going to the pitcher on the other side. And he's just not getting any ownership. At 8,200, he should be more than 5% owned just based on the matchup here. Like you said, this team has made worse pitchers than this and guys who have had lower strikeout rates for their careers than Noah Syndergaard into ace level pitchers a lot of times this year. So yeah, only a 17.5% strikeout rate for Syndergaard this year over 105 innings. He was never the guy that people seem to have falsely remembered. Everybody was thinking he was one of these high 30s or mid 30s strikeout rate guys. He was never that guy. He never cracked 30% in his career. So it's a big drop off to 17.5, but I do think he's got that upside to get against this lineup with plenty of strikeout targets in it. I think he can find some strikeout upside. So I definitely like the Syndergaard spot. He projects just below that top 3 tier of pitchers for me. So definitely going to be a spot for me where I'm well over the field.
Yeah, and again, you're going to get some length there that I think you could look at. I don't know at 7K against this Phillies bats. It's one thing to stack against Syndergaard and try and gain a little leverage if that moves, and even just a pitcher that could have a rough one as far as not being able to get out of a jam as easy with a lower K rate. But I don't know from just the other quadrant on here on the mound, Contreras versus the Philly bats, if it's worth being a low-cost option at 7K, or how much it's worth being a low-cost option at 7K. It's nice out today down here.
I don't really see it. We got a little bit out of him earlier in the season when he was going well, but at 7K and 0.5%, if you want to throw him into that bag of value options where you're just drawing, 1 to 5 lineups of each of these guys, then sure, fine. He's on that board. 21.4% strikeout rate, but at 10.7% walk, a 4.55 xFIP, 3.69% home run rate. pushing a 50% hard hit and 11.5% barrel rate. That's kind of a targetable guy with bats. And it doesn't look like the field's really going to Philly. More so on FanDuel, Schwarber's drawing 20%, Harper's drawing 13. Nobody else, everybody else 10 or below. On DK, only Schwarber 10.7%, everybody else well below 10%. So I think that's probably more targeting him with Philly's bats. And then on the other side, the Pirates are definitely on that list of you can grab 4 $2,000 bats from the bottom of the projected lineup. There's a $2,500 Ben Gamel, and none of the quote unquote stars from the Pirates are more than the 4,400 that Brian Reynolds costs. So easy enough to grab value there. The thing about that spot is Syndergaard's never a guy who's given up much power upside. He's never a guy who's given up many home runs in his career. 34.5% hard hit and a 2.5% home run rate with a 7.5% barrel rate this season. Just not a guy you can attack for a lot of upside, even when he doesn't have a great start. So I don't love it, but if you're hunting value to throw Cease and Scherzer and Verlander into a lineup, it's one of the teams that's available to you.
Now we have the Phillies as far as where Alex is on our Stokastic top stack percentage, right there near the top. We'll talk about the Padres going up against Heasley, a dream matchup, even for them. I don't know if they can fuck that up. And then also Toronto against Tucker Davidson, which is just below. It's maybe not the dream matchup, but it's a good dream. It's like when you wake up feeling nice and refreshed. But you're losing a lot of leverage against Davidson, rightfully so. You're actually, San Diego might be, depending on how you look at it, and we'll talk about them a little more in depth, might be one of the best plays on the board where we have right now as far as gaining leverage. The Phillies are kind of in the middle. And what's interesting is this is almost, you could make an argument, clearly San Diego is underowned, but you can make an argument that even with a little bit of negative leverage, which is basically nothing to the field on Philadelphia, against Contreras, the way they've been hitting, Bryce Harper is back. It seems like they're underowned. And I get it. There's 21 other teams you can look at, but looks like that number just under 7% might be a little low. And maybe you can take advantage of that before that becomes minus 2.5 leverage.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, there's all good reasons to attack Rusney Contreras here. The hard hit and the barrel rate, certainly. There's home run upside for days with these home run hitters in this lineup. And the overall ownership is getting pushed a little bit, primarily on FanDuel, where, like I pointed out before, Schwarber above 20%, Harper in the mid-teens, and then everybody else drops off. On DK, It's pushed a little bit by Schwarber, who's at 10, but everybody else in that lineup is in the low to mid-single digits. So I'm actually surprised it rates out. It's probably just based on the volume of overall teams peeling some of their probability percentage away. In the actual, if we consider a couple of those teams as to be, essentially zeros, I think a lot of those percentage probability points land with the Phillies and they boost up to positive leverage. So I agree with that. It's maybe mathematically based on volume, not a positive leverage spot, but I think if we were looking at the reality of the baseball situation, it probably could be considered one. And you can get good bats outside of the stars. Bryson Stott still only 4,100, 1.1% owned in the middle of this lineup. 8 home runs, 8 stolen bases, and 349 plate appearances is decent. Able to go to him for some DFS upside. Alec Boehm hitting third in this lineup, 4,400, 3,200 site to site, mid threes ownership. Easy bats to put in to offset ownership or cost with the Schwarbers, the Harpers of the world.
Let's move to the Jays Angels game here. Ross Stripling, 7,400. People are getting to him because of that price on DK as a good matchup. I'm sure there's an opportunity here or two to take advantage. And I know, unless Ohtani's playing, but the K rate is, the K rate for him significantly better than his other guy, Tucker Davidson. Was looking at that number. So 5,700 for Davidson. I don't even know how much of the field you're truly looking to counter there with a risk on Davidson. So I don't think anybody would hate you if you just faded, but you have Davidson and Stripling. Stripling's a little more interesting, clearly, because other people are getting to him so far with him being so negatively leveraged in that mid to kind of low stack or top 2 percentage.
Yeah, we've got Tucker Davidson projected for 0.5% ownership on both sites, and those 11 people are just wrong. He's
negatively leveraged, by the way.
That's
at the bottom.
That's ridiculous. That's how bad that spot is, guys. So anybody out there who's got a Tucker Davidson placeholder or a lineup where they think they're getting value there, just take it out. It's not the spot. 30 and a third and 11.3% strikeout rate, a 15.5% walk rate. You know what you are when your walk rate is higher than your strikeout rate? you're pretty bad. 6.08 xFIP. Yeah, definitely a guy you can throw Blue Jays bats at all day long. They're getting a little bit of popularity, but I think it's totally justified. I believe they're the top of the stacks board overall, and it just makes all the sense in the world. Maybe, Alejandro Kirk in the cleanup spot as a catcher for only 4,500 on that slate is getting a little bit of exaggerated ownership on DK at 18.7%, but everybody else is in the, 11 and 10% for Springer and Vladdy. Everybody else below 10%. That's easy enough to get to over there. They're a little bit more popular on FanDuel because they're just, stupid cheap. But yeah, Blue Jays all day long. And then I do think Stripling's interesting here, given the strikeout upside in that Angels lineup.
Yeah.
I think we could chase him. 95 innings, 21.1% strikeout rate, but a guy that I trust to pitch fairly cleanly, a 4.2% walk rate, 1.04 whip, 1.58% home run rate, doesn't give up a lot of hard hit. So maybe negates the upside of a Trout and an Ohtani. And then you're dealing with a version of this ace lineup. It starts with David Fletcher. It's got Luis Rengifo hitting cleanup, Mike Ford, Joe Adell, Ryan Aguilar, Kurt Suzuki, and Andrew Velasquez. Not exactly the 1927 Yankees here. So I think you could throw Ross Stripling at him. And I think he's probably under-owned based on the price and the upside there. He's probably my favorite target from the mid-range / value tier.
Yep. Let me see. As I talk, I'm going to pull up what his Ks are, because I imagine you could build a nice hefty over 4.5. I mean, it's heavily favored to the top. So if you started to if you really wanted to make money, you could build a 6, 7, 8 ladder plus 132, 260, 540 respectively. I mean, the ask here is clearly, as the books are telling you, over 4.5 minus 160. And again, odd shopper all day. That's where you go, especially now as everything has been updated, revamped and all. But look, 6, 7, 8. I mean, where does 6Ks? If I could put a unit on 6+ and that hits, I'll be okay with not hitting the 7.5 unit on 8. Is 6 anywhere close to your model?
So giving him the equivalent of like 5 1/3 innings, not even getting to the 6 inning mark, I've got him at a projection of 5.79 strikeouts. So if I give him 6, let's give him 6 clean innings. That puts him at 6.31 in my model. So yeah, I think it's at least gettable. I'm not saying it's necessarily, great, but if you're getting a nice price on that, that's gettable.
Okay. I'm going to ponder. I'm going to sit on that one and think about it for a second. I've got time. That's the beauty of it here.
I mean, the basic over definitely sounded doable. His raw projection for me is
5, right?
So
yeah, but then I'm betting 160 to win 1, and
yeah, that's it. You're not getting.
Who wants that, right? We're trying to give people some exciting plus money shit.
It.
Nobody wants the boring stuff that actually wins, right?
Right, exactly. Once you realize that about betting, it's such like an eye-opening thing. Like, why do I chase these things that yes, they're those odds for a reason, but I still go to
seriously. The 6-leg parlay, not so much. The minus 175 to win 1, that's going to hit a ton. Yeah, okay. Well, that's not fun. What are you going to do with Tucker Davidson? You're not going to roster him. We get that. That's ridiculous. But no, Toronto. Right, that's the thing. So how do you get around? And here's the thing: it's 11 games, which is nice because even though Toronto should if this is an 8-game slate, maybe even a 9-game slate, I would double at the very least the negative leverage, right, that Toronto has here, especially if you took off somebody like Heasley on the docket. But how do you get around? It's not even a ton of negative leverage to really get around, Terry. So minus 3.5% going up against Davidson. I don't even know if that's something that would impact how much you're getting to Toronto.
Yeah, they're a little bit more popular than, say, Philly, who we were just talking about before, where I think, that would float Philly up in terms of them actually being positively leveraged. These guys are probably more around like efficient ownership, but they're more popular on the FanDuel slate. It's more problematic on FanDuel, where a lot of them are above 10 into the mid-teens, but I still don't think it's an issue because there's a lot of different spots where you can get very low-owned bats. You can offset it with differentiated pitching. Yeah, I want to go to the popular pitching, but for me, if I'm going to Dylan Cease, he's already a differentiator because he's not drawing the popularity that Scherzer and Verlander are on that FanDuel slate. So that helps immediately out of the gate get to these Blue Jays on FanDuel. On DK, it's getting pushed up a ton by Kirk at 18 14.7%. So if you just skip him, yeah, he's a great play at catcher, and you don't want to skip him in every Blue Jays stack that you make if you're making a few. But if you skip him in one or two and you just put in like, roster Bo Bichette at shortstop at 8.3% instead of Kirk for 400 more, drop down and put a Whit Merrifield in at second base or outfield for 3,701% ownership from later in the lineup, and use him as a wraparound. Hell, play Danny Jansen, the other catcher in this lineup, for 3,600 from the 9 hole. Use him as a pure wraparound. Danny Jansen has 10 home runs and 144 plate appearances, a 45.2% hard hit, and 18.3% barrel rate. That's a good bat. Hitting ninth as a catcher, yeah, it's a bad lineup spot, but there's value there if you're concerned about the Alejandro Kirk 18% ownership. Other than that, I think you can dip around a lot of the ownership. Lourdes Gurriel hitting third, 4,400 is 1.9% owned. That's absurd. He's not had a good season for power. He's not had a good season, for what we think of this guy. He hit 21 home runs last year. This year he's got 5. He's got a 107 ISO, but he still creates runs 16% better than average. 295, 346, 401. Surrounded by excellent hitters, he can be a part of my stacks.
Real quick on the Angels, because you mentioned just how bad it gets, the serious drop that you get after the top 2 guys. They're not getting much as a stack, and that makes sense. Even against Ross Stripling, right? They're not getting much as far as a total projection. But are you working Ohtani, Trout as more one-offs? Are you working even mini stacks with those guys, or is it not worth it because it's pretty obvious that this team is shit outside of those 2 guys? So I imagine that they're going to be super popular as one-offs.
They'll probably, if anything's going to be popular from this team, it'll be those guys as one-offs. But even Trout, 7.4% on DK, 6.4 on FanDuel. I'll take my shares of Trout and Ohtani as one-offs now. And even if I get them, a couple lineups, Trout, Ohtani, Rengifo, and either Ford or Adele, I don't totally hate that. On DK, especially if you're chasing those Verlander Scherzer lineups, this is another lineup you can look at where the bottom 5 hitters in this lineup will cost you 10,000 total to make a five-man stack. They're all the dead minimum 2,000. You do have some power there. Mike Ford, 35.5% hard hit and no home runs in 63 plate appearances this year, but we've seen this guy hit home runs in the past. We know there's lurking power in there. He's a lefty bat hitting 5th in this lineup behind the premium bats. Joe Adele, we know for sure has power in his bat. It just never really comes through at the major league level. 6 home runs and 205 plate appearances, but he does still have a 41.4% hard hit and 11.2% barrel. There's power there. Aguilar is a question mark. Kurt Suzuki, Andrew Velasquez, certainly not anybody that anybody really wants in their lineups. But if you're chasing dead minimum pricing, that's another spot you can go to. So I don't think they're worth crossing off, but I prefer the Stripling side of it for his upside in price. All
right. Let's move to New York, Colorado at New York here. And this has just been a weird series. I think I don't know why it has translated into this. I think everybody just expected the Rockies are so bad. The splits are so drastic away from home. It's the Mets, like being able to take advantage of it. But I don't know, today might be a little different as far as, overall, but even still, like, it's not a bad win to shut somebody out 3-0 by any means. But I think there was just a general expectation that New York would be able to get to Kyle Freeland, right? So you look at today's matchup and it's kind of just like, all right. And this is, again, like the gambler fallacy of, well, it didn't happen last time. It didn't happen 2 times ago. It's bound to happen now.
7 Reds in a row. It's got to be a black this time.
My God, seriously. But I mean, here's the thing. But it is German Marquez and it's Max Scherzer on the other side. Like, just again, like, you're going to fall into that same trap, are you not, of saying, well, sure, just like Freeland, they should be able to knock the cover off the ball on Marquez. And then also Max Scherzer should be able to go 7 to 9 innings today and cruise without giving up a run.
Yeah, and look, that's what we've come to expect from this Mets pitching staff at this point, especially against bad teams. But Rockies on the road against a righty is always a target for DFS until further notice. And when you get that righty being Max Scherzer, I totally agree with the field's 50.9% ownership on DK. They're 35% on FanDuel. I can't quibble with it at all. You should definitely expect a big upside start from Max Scherzer here. It's Max Scherzer. 30% strikeouts on the year, 3.43 xFIP, a 0.94 whip. Every reason in the world to throw Max Scherzer in wherever you can afford him. If you're at the field, you're fine. If you're over the field, you're fine. I'll probably be a little under because of everybody, I'm sure, has heard me talk about how I build lineups, but I'll be 25, somewhere around there, and maybe it'll approach the field's level on FanDuel, 35 25 versus the 35.
Right.
On DK, I'd be, 35 to 40% versus the 50%. Just shave a little off to spread to some of the Syndergaards and maybe Lidolos of the world. And on Marquez on the other side, he's a pitcher that coming into the year, I liked. I was saying, he's a guy, he's still on my dynasty team because I've got him for $1 going into next year's, maybe we get him onto a different team. If he's pitching for the Cardinals, he's a totally different pitcher and I want to be a part of that. But this year hasn't been there at all for him. He's been a little bit better in the second half, but only a 19% strikeout rate over 139 and 2/3. A 3.91 xFIP is fine, but not good. 46.9% hard hit is certainly targetable with guys like Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, Daniel Vogelbach in this lineup as a Vogelback, Jeff McNeil. I learned that it was actually Vogelback recently. I think it was EMAC DM me that. I've been saying Vogelbach.
Vogelback, like, yeah, he's going to want to make sure anything that sounds like Mac is
right.
Exactly is pronounced.
Mac's got to look out.
Exactly. You never know, man. You never know what kind of weird click or type of criteria is formed anymore nowadays.
EMAC wants everybody whose name rhymes with his to vote for him in 2024. That's all it is. But a lot of bats in this lineup of the Mets that you can chase too, going down the lineup like Kana, Naquin, Brett Beatty is back in the lineup today. No Escobar in the lineup. So I think this lineup plays at least 1 through 8. If you need a cheap catcher, there's nothing wrong with James McCann on DK. So it's a lineup where I think you can go back to the well here, and they're not drawing any love or any attention at all. There's upside in that Mets lineup. They're cheap on FanDuel too.
Okay. And I mean, really on the other side, you mentioned how cheap they are on FanDuel. Is it worth that risk on DK?
Let's see where I just clicked away from. Where are they on DK? They're not, I mean, you get 57 for Lindor and 54 for Alonso. So maybe it's tough to put both of those Mets and Scherzer and Verlander into your lineup. But maybe if you only probably sacrifice one or the other of those 2 stars, everybody else is fairly cheap. Nimmo's 47. McNeil's 43, but Vogelback is 39, Kana's 37, Naquin's 38. They're easy enough to get to. And then if you're pairing them with some of those $2,000 guys, then you probably can get to the 2 stars as like a 3-man. If you wanted a 3-man Nimmo, Lindor, Alonso, or Lindor, Alonso, Vogelback, I think that's pretty easily doable.
Okay. Well, anything else on this game from, I guess, either standpoint that we didn't hit? Just wanted to make sure. I don't
really think that the Rockies are worth going to here, even as they hedge against all that Scherzer ownership. It might be a Sean's on kind of spot, but it's not really a spot for me. Not a good lineup on the road. If you're doing it, your guys are probably going to be, Ryan McMahon, Brendan Rodgers, CJ Cron, maybe some Charlie Blackmon, maybe some Randall Grichuk. It's not a great lineup.
By the way, I don't think you'll ever stop saying Vogelbach. Like, I'll never stop saying it, right? Like, it's just ingrained in you.
Right. Yeah. BACH to me is.
Yeah. That's on him. All right. It's not our fault. All right.
Right. But yeah, apparently he made a point to tell the Mets announcers that it was Vogelback. And then EMAC made a point to tell me.
So you okay. Well, look, that's good. Pronunciation is key. I joke because it is.
Everybody knows
important.
I'm a fan of the correct pronunciations.
Well, absolutely. That's why I was giving you a little bit of that.
Yeah. The best facsimile I can do of the correct pronunciations anyway.
Oh, all right. Let's go to, before we hit Dylan Cease, D-backs in town. We have to just remind people, and this has been a nice little constant for us so far, where people have just sprinkled in a nice super chat here or there, kind of reminding the world this stuff works. You see it posted all the time on Twitter. If it's not Terry, if it's not Greg, somebody here is banking something big, taking down another tournament. So it's not just these guys. It's so many people out there like you who are making up the chat. And all we want to do is just give you the opportunity here to be in the Hall of Fame and take 50% off your first week, right, of Stokastic Plus, the pass across the board. And it's so simple because we have this link below. So you can click on that. Your promo code is MLB Live, and it's 50% off your first week of any weekly package. So you can just go to work, right? You only want to play MLB DFS. We keep telling you this on all these shows, sports specific shows. If you're only here for one sport, that's fine. You can take advantage of that. You can play the shit out of that. Get 50% off your first week of Stokastic Plus Platinum and see how easy it is to really just apply all of the stuff that's done for you. I mean, this isn't just 2 or 3 guys that woke up one day and said, all right, let's create an algorithm. This is proven stuff. Like, you can see the people right at the top. And then here's another thing. This is what I love about it. It's the trickle down effect. And it's not the old trickle down economics effect, Terry McBride, but it's the that's like an EMAC reference, but it's the trickle down in the sense of you've got Alex, you've got Steve, you've got people that are much smarter than me, I know, and probably a lot of people. You mentioned Sean, like there are people that are creating and putting and crunching. And then there are people like yourself, like Adam, like Eric, like Greg, who are top players that are using this into your models, into your projections, into your winning tournaments. So look at this. Fun sweats tonight, right? You just saw Ehrenberg take down, like, I don't know, 7 tournaments it was. That's all. That's all. I know I'm going along here, but I just want to remind you that this isn't me. Like, I'm not getting a percentage of how many times you click the link. It's just, I don't know how much more we can reinforce that this shit works. There's Neil. There you go.
That's it.
Bang.
Well, you see everybody at the top of standings in all these tournaments day after day right now. And it's clearly proven over time, because that's how I found the site. And I've been around here, in addition to when I was a member, when I've been working here, I've been around here for, 4 or 5 years now, I guess, since, basically the site started. But that's how I found it, was I kept seeing these guys with this same logo and this same name up at the top of the standings. And it's been kind of the same all throughout those 4 or 5 years now. So I think it's pretty proven at this point, guys. So if you're still on the fence, I don't know why, but you can definitely check it out and just take a look at all those results, like Eytan's saying, and that 50% off promo plus the night slates being free now. Pretty killer.
That's a good point. Yeah, a nice little addition. Sweep the pot right there.
Not bad, right? Yeah, we're just gonna say, hey, those slates to 3 or 4 games with $10,000 up top to first on both sites, or excuse me, on DraftKings, gonna be totally free to check out all the different tools, the top stacks, top pitchers, all that stuff. That's awesome. That's killer.
I love it. All right, White Sox, Diamondbacks in town here. Dylan Cease on the mound. Man, I was trying to burn through as much as we can so we can BS a little bit, but it's hard with 11 games, brother. I don't know what we do. Right. So let's look at the White Sox first and foremost with Dylan Cease. I mean, I will get to the other side here if there is any interest with Zach Davies, but really this is Dylan Cease. He is the cheapest of the 3, and he's losing the least amount of leverage, but there's a gap. I mean, there's a 5% gap between he and Verlander, and even more. I mean, close to 15% between he and Scherzer. So this opens up a question I kind of have for you, as far as not just, and you can talk about Cease to the field, but does Cease become more of an option when you're looking to pair 2 of the 3, simply because of less leverage, less cost, but not that wide of a gap between a guy like Verlander?
Yeah, because it'll be easier to put him with either one of those other 2 because of the cost basis, right? And you're getting him at lower ownership. But right. I do think by virtue of that, there probably will be more lineups that are either a combination of Scherzer and Cease or Verlander and Cease than Scherzer and Verlander. Or maybe it'll at least push it up where that ownership offset won't necessarily be reflected in those pairings, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Because I think so many people will be doing that specific combination that it'll at least come out like maybe even to where people are doing Scherzer and Verlander. And if you're squeezing a little bit more upside out of Scherzer and Verlander, then it makes sense to go to that approach. But I don't think you're losing with any of them. Cease is my favorite target out of the 3 because of that lower ownership, especially on FanDuel, 12.8%. By comparison to these other guys, that's just a great spot. The Diamondbacks are a worse matchup than the other guys have, but they're still gettable. For the season against righties, 20.9% strikeout rate is 11th in baseball. A 164 ISO is 10th. So there's a little bit of power. 3.07% home run rate is 12th, but overall they create runs 5% worse than average, 23rd in baseball against righties. So I think, there's upside for Cease to pitch through cleanly. And he's a guy that I trust for strikeout upside, 31.8% strikeout rate on the season. He can find strikeouts even in a lineup that doesn't necessarily strike out a ton. 10.7% walk rate. Yeah, there's a little concern about, putting himself into trouble, but he pitches his way out of that a lot of the time with that strikeout upside. 2.27 ERA, a 3.29 xFIP on the season. He's a very, very good pitcher with not enough ownership on him in this spot. So that's my favorite of the 3 premium pitchers, just based on the cost and the ownership offset. And I think he's a great option if you're looking for a pivot from one of those other guys.
So, I'm sorry. I guess I'm low because, or maybe you were fading at the end. It was one of the two because I didn't mean to jump in on the last.
Oh no,
thing that
I
you said.
finished. I think I just ran out of breath and trailed off. You know me. I talk until I run out of breath, and then you can take over
I
again.
know. But normally it's like it's the same level, the volume. So I think it was just a trailing. Maybe you were really gassed. I don't know. Maybe my headphones were low.
Just really hit the.
Could be one of the two or both. But I wonder, just looking at it, and this came up on the weekend last start actually for Cease. It was for the parlay video where that we do an odd shopper.
Mhm.
And one of the legs, it was a 3-leg K prop, and we faded. We went under 6.5 Ks for Cease. And just looking at this over his last really 4 starts, if you want to just look at August, do you think that there is some hesitation to slam Cease in lineups because 4Ks? You have that 8-1 against the Royals, 5Ks before that. I mean, if you're just looking at 6.5 to 7 Ks of expectation, kind of what we got really towards the middle and then end of July is where it kind of waned a little bit. But I don't know if this is just a downward stretch here that he's going to bounce back, or if that is maybe some warranted concern to stay off him a little. I just wanted to bring that up because it's
Sure.
something that we've seen. Right.
Yeah, it's worth talking about for sure. It was a little bit of a downturn. You see that from time to time. Guys go through a little bit of arm fatigue from time to time during a season, and there's a little blips. There's also just games where there's just some happenstance. Maybe he didn't get a couple calls with 2 strikes. So guys, put the ball in play. Who knows? The specifics of it. But he's a guy that I just trust for his strikeout upside. He was a strikeout. He had that reputation coming into the league a few years ago. He had a 31.9% strikeout rate over 165 and 2/3 last year. This year over 139 innings, 31.8%. So he's lost 0.1% on his strikeout rate since last season. I'm good with taking him here. If we see a longer stretch, like I'm just much more about a large sample size than I am a couple cherry picking games out of the game log. So he's got enough leash for me, and especially at an offset cost and offset ownership compared to the other aces. It's a spot I'll chase, and we might see him come out with a low strikeout total, a low-ish strikeout total again here because they are good at offset at avoiding the strikeouts. But I do think that he's got an upside to pitch through a clean game, get you that quality start, get you 7 innings and 5-6 strikeouts at the very least.
Let's see what the total is because it was sitting at 6.5 for a while as far as just even as he was going through this mini, and that's I think a good explanation there for it, where you're not just looking. I mean, it's juiced, it's heavily shaded to the under here, but it's at over 7.5. Now, I just wouldn't play that personally because the guy could K9 people on any outing. But to your point about Arizona, it's a small sample size, but it's still a sample size. Like I don't know if I would push that. C 6+ Ks Chicago to win is -120. 7+ is +125. I may look at 6+ and the White Sox to win more so than try to go over 7.5.
If you get him,
you tell me, Terry. I bring it up. You tell me.
I'm looking at it right now in my model. If I give him exactly 6 innings, it's a 7.46 projected strikeouts. If you're going to that 6+ of innings pitched with the win, maybe you do book the strikeout upside alongside it, because that does push him over that 7.5 for me, even with Arizona's upside. That's taking into account his implied number is higher by more than a strikeout than his projected number. So that's taking into account Arizona's acumen for avoiding the strikeout. If you like him to go 7, I think maybe you got a shot at that. So if you can go like 7, the win and the strikeout over and get a nice price, not the worst thing in the world.
The risk would be 9 Ks at +220.
Now we're pushing it.
Right. That's not.
It certainly got the upside to get there. I wouldn't be shocked to see Dylan C strike. Like you said, 9 strikeouts against anybody would not surprise me with this pitcher, but that's probably pushing it.
Okay. 8 Ks and the White Sox to win is +195. I'd like that to be north of 2-1, so I'm not going to bet it, but I did want to just bring that up.
I mean, what's the difference between 7.5 and 8 when we're really betting? I mean, 8 strikeouts.
Well, it's
he's not going to actually get 7.7 strikeouts.
No.
It's 8+.
It's 8+ and Chicago to win is +195. Okay. That's the difference. 7+ is just -170.
Okay, gotcha.
7+ and Chicago.
I do think Chicago's the better team here. I think going up against Zach Davies. We didn't really touch on their bats yet, DFS wise, but I think they're a decent.
No, go ahead.
DFS. It's not the greatest version of this lineup. Romy Gonzalez, Josh Harrison, Jose Abreu, Andrew Vaughn, Gavin Sheets, Eddie Pollock into the Elvis Andrus, Engel Zavala part of the lineup. But I do think there's still enough upside with a few of those bats. Abreu, Vaughn, Sheets, Pollock is certainly a good 4-man stretch. They're not that popular DFS wise. I expect that against Zach Davies here, they'll create a few runs and probably win this game. So DFS wise, don't hate going to that lineup at low ownership and low cost. And I don't hate that bet either. It's at least you can see a line to it.
That's all I need is just a logical pathway from you and not just setting up roadblocks, what have you here. All right. So anything quick that we didn't hit on the White Sox bats that are where, I mean, they're kind of just sandwiched in the middle. They do have nothing jumps out as far as where they're projected as an overall stack. And you're not really knocking off a bunch of the field by any means with Zach Davies. We know that. So is there something, maybe there's something from a matchup standpoint or even a sub-stack standpoint that shoots out because they don't really jump off the paper when it comes to overall, right?
Yeah, it's again, it's not really a good version of this lineup at this point, just between injury and, a couple guys being
White
out.
Sox.
Moncada went back on the IL. So you got a lot of guys missing, but you do still have Abreu with a 51.1% hard hit, Vaughn with a pushing a 50% hard hit. So there's some good targets in that lineup. And then on the other side, going up against Cease, I mentioned the high walk rate. He's a little bit more targetable maybe for some hedge stacks than the other aces on this slate. And we talked about the Diamondbacks and their upside for power, their upside for avoiding the strikeout, but they are 5% worse than average creating runs. Nobody's going there though. So if you wanted to grab a few shares of Christian Walker, Josh Rojas, Jake McCarthy, Dalton Varsho, certainly from the top of the lineup, that's not too bad. Guys like Stone Garrett, he's like a quad A type hitter. He's only 2,200. I get that he's hitting 400, 600 over his first 17 plate appearances, but he's not really a guy I want to chase that much. Bottom end of the lineup, really, really thin here.
All right, let's move on to Minnesota. 8.5 run total in this game. Giants tight favorite. I think it was Lindquist who just popped in here. All in on Giants against Sanchez today, and then he left. He just he photo bombed us with he's rolling with the Giants, and then he left.
Unless he's going for that Twins fan reverse jinx on Sanchez.
You think so?
Could be.
Are Twins fans? No, I'm sorry, Neil Overfield. Please close your ears on this. Are Twins fans smart enough for that?
Ooh, ouch.
I asked Neil to close his ears.
Right. Well, based on that, based on Neil Orfield being one, I guess we can't take them down.
That's my whole point. Yes, that was my whole point was to just have Neil not hear that. And this was more directed to Eric. I don't know I don't know. That would be one hell of a strategy.
Yeah, that would be complex for sure. And it would be backing a pitcher with a 15.3% strikeout rate this season over his 40 and a third innings. Last year, 16.7 over 35 and a third. Hasn't pitched a lot. He was formerly a guy that I didn't love to target because he was good at keeping the ball down and keeping home runs in the yard. This year, he's given up a 48.9% hard hit, but only an 8.3 degree average launch angle, 5.7% barrel rate. So still a little bit difficult to elevate the ball and get it out of the yard against. But there's enough quality in that Giants lineup if you're not worried about the pinch hit risk or anything like that, that I think you can take some shots there for sure. They're not one of my favorite targets, but they're cheap enough. There's enough upside. Guys like Tommy La Stella, Brandon Crawford drawing a little bit of popularity, but not concerningly so. So I get it. You can go there.
What about the Minnesota bats though, right? I mean, it's going to be a lot harder to back Sanchez. What about the stack?
Yeah, I don't mind that. They're showing a little bit of power around Correa, Kepler, Miranda in the middle of that lineup. The rest on the fringes, like the Gio Urshela's, Jake Caves of the world, I don't love, but they can certainly make it into lineups for cost and ownership basis. Not that much popularity going to this team for the power upside. So yeah, I think you can get there. Nick Gordon, oddly drawing 15.8% projection for the dead minimum on DK. He's hitting fifth. 267, 311, 413 on the season, creating runs 8% better than average, 5 home runs, 6 stolen bases. I don't really get that ownership in conjunction with the rest of the ownership. I guess maybe just because he's a cheap guy in the middle of a lineup versus some of these $2,000 hitters at the bottom of lineups. But that's a little odd outlier sitting in the middle of that lineup ownership wise. Everybody else is low on DK.
All right. So anything else with the Giant? No, we talked about that really, right? You got through it all.
Yeah, I think we covered this one.
Okay. Okay. I mean, Lindquist did his best to derail, and it worked. He's a sharp kid. This
Momentarily.
guy, this Eric. Look, I can't be too mean to him because I'm getting to the point right now where I'm good enough at golf where I can benefit from his tips. So I'm trying to toe the line right now. Not literally toe the line. All right. You saw the toe at the start of the show.
Yeah, I did. I had no idea. I guess I missed how you set that up. For people out there, I turned to the camera or turned to the screen in Zoom, and all I saw was just Eytan stretched over backward with his toe like hanging in front of the camera. And I guess he was trying to show us something, but just the calisthenics involved in that were kind of impressive.
Thank you. I'm not in calisthenic shape anymore, so that's nice. And whenever I get a victory, even a small one here,
it was some kind of like advanced yoga pose that you got into to show us that. But yeah, don't drop things on your toes.
All right, let's go to Houston. Verlander, another one here where we kind of we can't bury the lead like with Cease, we're like with Scherzer. So Verlander is in the middle. I think actually in the middle, right, of the 800 difference between Scherzer and Cease on DK. Not only, and this is, I wanted to wait, Terry, because we can talk about the matchup, how much you like it. It is favorable. Shout out to EMAC because he did break that down as far as the advantages that Houston has against Baltimore. It doesn't mean necessarily that he's an automatic slam either, but not only the matchup here against Baltimore, but now that we're hitting all three of these top guys on the slate, who is your best option on FanDuel as well?
So for me, it's just, I'm coming back to that cost and ownership difference that I'm getting on Dylan Cease while getting very similar upside in both my projections and just his overall performance, throughout his career. I think he's every bit the pitcher that these other guys are. And you're getting him at a significantly lower ownership clip there. That said, I will have plenty of Max and Verlander. I'm actually in the process right now of just sorting to those pitchers and making sure that I have those shares because of how it's coming out with Cease's value. It's pushing more shares of him and then some of these other fringe guys. So I want to make sure that I get these top two aces here. The Orioles have been frisky throughout the season. There's certainly an up and coming lineup. We've talked about them a lot on shows. If you want to go to them against Verlander here, I wouldn't begrudge anybody a couple of shares because they're all 0.5% owned and they're not crazy expensive. So there's some quality in like Mullins, Rutschman, Santander, Mountcastle, Hayes. If you want to go to that, maybe Jorge Mateo from the bottom of the lineup, but Verlander's much more the talking point here. He's 11,000 and 11.4 from site to site, only 17% owned on FanDuel. That might be a little low. 25% or more would not be an issue. 41.6 on DK for 11 grand, I think is perfectly reasonable. I would be around the field, if not slightly over it on both sites. I think it's a great spot. 26% strikeout rate for Verlander on the season, 3.36 xFIP, a 0.85 whip. Just never gets himself in trouble. Not a pitcher I worry about at all against anybody.
Strikeouts there, you think, to push? I mean, Baltimore's a plus 200 dog here. I mean, this would be astronomically difficult, I think. No knock on Austin Voth, but I mean,
yeah, I don't expect the Orioles to come out and put a bunch of runs up. I don't expect them to come out and win this game. They are decent. They're middle of the league in basically everything. 21.8% strikeout rate overall against their righties is 14th in baseball. Respectable power, 105 WRC plus. So they can create runs. They can get to anybody, but Verlander is just the top end of that anybody. So if I'm going to trust, a pitcher, it's Justin Verlander is always on that list. I expect the Verlander side of that to come through a little bit more.
Yeah, real quick though, and I don't know how much this factors into Houston and if there's anything even in their strikeout rate, but it's not great. It's not bad, but the 20.4% K rate for Voth with the anticipation that, he can be out there for a little bit. Is there anything there? I mean, look, I have a total at 3.5. So is there anything there? What could I get for 5K? How long does Voth need to be out there for you to get 5Ks? Because that's where it starts to get interesting. And again, if he's at Thor level and,
the next 2 or 3 games. Yeah. Can he have like 3 starts to get there?
All right. Fair enough.
I just don't he's not a pitcher I like going to. The 20-ish% strikeout rate that he's got is fine, but especially against this Houston team, they're better at not striking out against lefties where they're only 16.2% on the season, but against righties, they're only 20%, fifth in baseball. It's just not a team I like to target with stuff like that. I don't see him getting there.
So Steph Fortless, pardon me if I butchered that. I'm worried that Scherzer and Verlander will have short days because they're already locked into the playoffs. You can't talk about that in June, July, but we are at the end of August. So I don't know. And look, I bring it up because I don't know if it's a thing or not, or how much it can be a thing as we get closer to the start of the postseason, especially because to that point, both teams are pretty much locked in and there's no general concern. Now, if you're losing, or if it's a tight game and you want to stretch out another inning, that's one thing. If you're up 7 runs in the 5th inning, maybe there is something to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not something I love to guess at. If we had a piece of information where, one of the managers came out and said, hey, this is what we're doing, then I would, certainly be taking it into more into consideration a little bit more. But just as a pure speculative play, maybe that's the case. But I mean, the Mets are still only 3 games up in the division on the Braves, so they're certainly still chasing some upside there. So I don't necessarily know that that's going to be a thing. The Astros have the division put away. They're 11.5 games up. So maybe you see it more from the Verlander side, but they're also both guys who just don't need that many pitches probably to pitch 7 innings, find a bunch of strikeouts. Like you see these guys routinely do that with 80, 90 pitches. So I'm not that worried about it. Not with these guys. Like that wouldn't be the reason I want to miss on a big game from one of these guys, is because I was worried about them not pitching 6, 7 innings.
All right, Jonathan, this one here is a slam dunk as we move to Kansas City. I mean, the leverage that you're gaining for the top stack. I don't know how often this is. I don't know if there is any type of narrative that's not built into success, Terry, but more so built into public behavior. Like people are still not rushing to San Diego for whatever reason, especially on a larger slate. But my God, going up against Heasley, being the top projected stack that Alex has on our rankings on Stokastic, and not even being like the 4th or maybe 5th highest owned team, something seems a little off, like you could squeeze in there an attack.
Yeah, that definitely sounds a little bit off. Going up against Heasley is certainly a very targetable spot. He's sitting at a 16.1% strikeout rate over 65 2/3 this season, 5.40 xFIP. You're dealing with a lineup that's got Soto, Machado, Bell, Drury in it. So definitely can go there, throw Cronenworth on the end of it, and any of those other bats. Definitely like that spot. We are, by the way, pushing up against Lock. Lock's 135.
Oh, I thought it was 145.
That's because that's what it says on our schedule, but that is incorrect information.
Oh, okay.
So I just realized that I got to do these lineups in. We can keep on talking, but I got to put some lineups in.
All right, that's my. I don't know. Where's Jordan? No. Jordan went to get his food, and we never saw him again. I mean, you shouldn't be the one that's correcting my mistakes. It should be Jordan coming down on me.
Hey, as long as as long as we're doing the people a service and giving them good info, right?
Yep. All right, let's look at this. Last 2 games here. We'll try and combine as much as we can, and you have no problem talking for 2.5 minutes straight anyway, which I love about you. So let's look at this here. I mean, we've got the Cubs and Milwaukee, the Tigers, right? Last game there. So from a pitching standpoint, Texas would be the other squad to attack. Arihara was getting a lot of love on the chat, a ton of positive leverage. And, Drew Hutchinson is probably a guy similar to Davidson and Heasley that you want to stay as far away from. So we always break this down into quadrants, right? Next 2 games, what's jumping out at you from a quadrant standpoint, matchup standpoint that you think is definitely targetable?
So I'm going to go back and throw the Padres and Royals back onto the table here, because I do think Sean Manaea is potentially a little bit underowned. 8,600, 5.5%. 9,900 is a little bit expensive, but 0.7% ownership. You could get an upside start out of Manaea. He hasn't thrown a ton of pitches, which might be scaring some people away, but he's been pitching through a lot of innings in his starts when he's been going good, and he's been finding his strikeouts. So against this Royals lineup, there's plenty of strikeouts there. I think that's somewhat interesting, but I would probably grab some Royals on the other side of it. Bobby Witt, Sal Perez, maybe some Brent Rooker, some Nick Prado, despite the lefty. I would have a few shares of Royals. The Witt, Perez, Dozier part of that lineup is a little popular site to site. That said, we can move on from that one. No love for Adrian Sampson. Not really going to Eric Lauer. I don't fully trust him against even a team as bad as the Cubbies. They've got some right-handed pop in that lineup, and I just think he runs into enough home run balls that I'm a little bit concerned about him. Maybe you find some Franmil Reyes, some Ian Happ shares on the Cubs side of things if you're stacking them, and get a little bit of under-owned or not at all owned home run upside there. For the season, Lauer, a 4.44% home run rate, 38.7% hard hit, 8.4% barrels aren't terrible, but that home run rate, there's some happenstance in there, but that's maybe targetable there. So I don't fully trust him. He's not that popular, but he's 10K on the FanDuel slate, 9,500 on the DK slate. There is strikeout upside, but I think he's maybe a little bit over-owned. So not one of my favorite pitching spots. The Brewers, I'm definitely going to have a bunch of, or at least I hope they're in what I put into the FanDuel slate here. I'm seeing a bunch of power upside, bunch of home run upside around Rowdy Tellez, Hunter Renfroe, Willy Adames, Keston Hiura is even pulling a little bit. Christian Yelich, certainly from the top of the lineup. They're drawing a little bit of popularity, but I think for price, for power upside against Adrian Sampson, that's a great spot. The Tigers are on that list of teams. There are 5 Tigers that are 2,000 on the DK slate, and then Heimer Candelario for 2,200. If you're building very cheap, very last minute DK stacks that need to include Verlander and Scherzer, that's one of my preferred spots. I do not think Arihara is a good pitcher. He wasn't good in Japan. I don't think he's going to be good in the sustained sense in the major leagues. 3.87 xFIP in his 2 starts, an 18.4% strikeout rate. I'm fine with grabbing some Tigers bats. They're probably a little bit under-owned. I'm showing a little bit of power on some of those guys that I named. Harold Castro is an interesting bat, dead minimum, and hitting 4th in that lineup. Rangers going up against Drew Hutchison. Hutchison tends to suppress home run upside, but he's not a good pitcher. So if you grab a few Ranger stacks, you're looking for some run creation, some sequencing, but he does tend to suppress the home run ball for some reason. If you can figure out why, you can DM me and let me know.
On that note, great stuff. That is one hell of a way to end. By all means, at DigitalB21 is Terry on Twitter. I'm at Shander Show. Thanks to Jordan, of course, for making this thing happen. Thanks to you all out there. Look, subscribe. Please hit the thumbs up button if you haven't already. We appreciate that. It's locked, so go on, get out there, make some money. Good luck to everybody out there. Thank Terry on Twitter when you win, not just the Awesome Hall of Fame.
Love seeing those. Makes my day every day.
Those are great.